Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. Yes, you read the headline right. Welcome to a channel that goes into depth on first-hand research that collects data, analyzes it, and draws inferences independent of other people's opinions. Supposedly, China will dominate the EV industry, and there are statistics to back up these claims. You see, these century-old automotive companies, well, they finally met their match, and it's China. In fact, just China and all these Chinese car companies. They're coming for legacy autos and growing at rapid rates to achieve that. And despite all of legacy autos' experience in manufacturing automobiles, along with their enormous war chests and political connections, well, these little Chinese companies aren't intimidated. They can take on these massive corporations. Because now their auto industry is so old, all of these legacy companies have become complacent, antiquated, and stuck in their old ways. The Chinese EVs will dominate the world, including America. They'll eventually outsell Tesla on Tesla's home turf. Yup, get used to Chinese brand vehicles everywhere. This was to be expected, what with everything else in your house being of Chinese brands. It was inevitable it would also end up in your garage too. Oh wait, hang on, none of the brands in my house are Chinese, or any of the shops I go to sell them. No, it's just all made there, but the Chinese don't seem to be able to brand products very well. Their brands have no brand power, value, goodwill, class, history, or prestige. Anyway, no worries, that's not important, as they can leapfrog the legacy autos with new modern-day facilities, robots and manufacturing processes, along with the best labour the world has to offer when it comes to manufacturing. Yes, the battlefield is set, but they aren't really going to be battling each other for some time. There's still plenty of ICE vehicles to replace before the Chinese and legacy autos start competing head-to-head for the actual EV market share. This is supply-side economics, and there isn't enough supply, and won't be for some time. Well, you know, unless the Chinese can maintain these insane growth rates. Except it's a lot easier to grow 300% when you only produce 2,500 vehicles a month compared to 10,000. The growth plateaus. And we're just talking about their vehicle production capacity. What's the real capacity inhibitor? Well, it's batteries, of course. Sure, perhaps a brief chip shortage there, but we're back to batteries. All EV companies need more batteries to grow. Of course they need more income and capital to grow too, as they're all losing so much money, although some are starting to show a decent gross margin. Li Autos is up to 22%. And BYD can last selling EVs for some time, as 50% of their revenue comes from handsets, which subsidises their BEV operations. And Legacy is also able to support their EV growth with their ICE business, although they may not be able to rely on that too much longer. The difference between Legacy and Chinese though, is the Chinese companies don't have the positive cash flow that allows them to borrow around tens of billions of dollars for cell and battery factories. Do you see what's happening here? Fast forward to around 2025, or around after everyone has had enough chance to catch their breath in the EV race and actually show something significant. Alright, we're assuming Legacy Auto's EV businesses are still standing, of which I think is likely, but maybe under new ownership. Remember, Legacy will likely be given bailouts to fund their EV businesses too. Well, guess what? In 2025, the EV race will be, you guessed it, still battery constrained. So who has all the batteries? Well, how about we look at everyone's targets for around 2025 or later in the decade? Legacy Autos claim they're going to be making enough factories to produce in the region of 1 terawatt-hours a year. And to do this, they've likely invested some absolutely insane figure like a collective $250 billion. So I ask you again, in the future, when EV companies have had time to build up all their necessary facilities in order to play, and if we are still battery constrained, then who has the most batteries? Is it Legacy or is it the Chinese? Where are the headlines about NIO investing $30 billion for their own cell plant with LG or someone? They are all investing small because they are small. But there are the Chinese battery cell companies, CATL and BYD. They have big plans on building up their battery production. Yes, indeed they do. And you know why, don't you? Because Tesla is pretty much a monopsony to them. Every cell they make, Tesla will buy, and then sells the cells off in a vehicle, making vastly more profit per cell than anyone else ever could, thus justifying that any cells are of most value to Tesla compared to any other EV automaker because no one else makes a profit. Well, not entirely no one. Wuling make a profit on their EVs, as they were also able to hit volume production due to the most basic design of a car imaginable. In fact, it is these micro EVs that have confused everyone. We hear these statistics about how fast production of EVs in China are growing. Well, it's because these small little micro EVs also get labelled under the EV category, and despite these vehicles being too dangerous for sale in any developed nation, they still get included in statistics. And then people use statistics to jump to conclusions rather than analysing raw data themselves. The raw data says that these vehicles have batteries of around 10 kilowatt hours, meaning a Model Y would consume about 8 times as many cells as a Wuling. Now, if you were cell constrained, then it would mean you can simply make 8 times as many EVs if you went for micro EVs instead of a sedan or crossover. And that's what they've done. Developed nations are far more entitled and demand safety features like airbags and a range more than a day's trip. Oh, and a car with a top speed that can actually reach the speed limit. I think this is the real future of Chinese EVs. I think they need to pick a market where they don't have to compete with Legacy or Tesla. This means that the vast majority of additional cell production in China will be earmarked for Tesla. So if Tesla alone are purchasing the majority of cells produced in China alone, please tell me how it can be possible for Chinese cars with less efficiency and larger batteries to outsell Tesla in the US using less than half as many cells as Tesla have just from China. Tesla also have cells from Korea, the US, Japan, and soon Berlin. Do you see now? The math alone of how it is literally impossible for China to outsell Tesla in the US. China's future with EVs seems overrated, and I know Elon does congratulate China on how good a job they're doing, but of course he would. He needs to maintain a good relation with China. He probably wants to boost their self-confidence a bit too, perhaps, as if he's telling them, no, really, you guys are doing a great job. Biggest cell manufacturer in the world. Brilliant. Yeah, don't worry about that Texas factory or anything. The Chinese are not laying down their foundations for the future. They can't though, that's the problem. Even if they could find the capital and build the factories and produce the cells, well, they still need to make the cars, which they struggle with, i.e. no volume production. Then even the cars they do make, well, not enough people want to buy them unless they sell them for a loss. Seriously, think about that. Everyone is having to sell their EVs right now at a loss. Imagine if they tried to sell them with a profit. The prices would have to rise so much there wouldn't even be enough demand for the vehicles they do make. And everything I've said so far has come from a supply standpoint, almost like we're suggesting the Chinese can just make any old EV and it will sell, which certainly is not the case. I think it will take a lot of convincing to get US consumers to buy a Chinese EV, especially over a Tesla or Ford. There's little reason for these EVs to even cost much less. And they will certainly put a lot of US consumers off due to the fact they offer such little range and likely handle badly. They won't have a charging network, they won't have service centres, they will be paying import duties, etc. And this is to the US. An incredibly difficult nation for any company to enter, but likely extra hard up against Tesla. Even if there were all those things and the product was identical to a Tesla, then US consumers still feel comfort in an American brand over Chinese. Automatically, any EV coming from China is instantly discounted for that reason. Their brands carry very little value, and a consumer will always see value over a brand they recognize and trust, like Toyota or BMW. In other words, the Chinese would therefore not stand to profit as much for that reason alone. Also, consumers are definitely seeing more value in longer range vehicles. It looks like nickel cells are going to be a lot more profitable than LFP after all, and Legacy actually bet on the right chemistry. Well, can't Chinese make long range too? They make nickel cells as well. Yes, absolutely, except they don't make many nickel cells and haven't invested in tens of billions of dollars in expanding the nickel cells, so they will not be competing in the long range EV market. An entire major market missed. The Chinese will also struggle tremendously with crossovers and SUVs, due to SUVs being heavier and bigger than sedans, resulting in insufficient range. The Chinese can't compete in the most popular vehicle segments in the US. Chinese are destined to be cheap, short-range EVs, and with protectionism, whatever remains of Legacy Auto's EV businesses, the Chinese will have a very hard time competing in any developed nations for EVs. But who said they need to? The world is a big place, and there are plenty of consumers out there that can't afford Legacy EVs. Asia and South American markets are huge, and I think this is where I see the Chinese auto's future. I don't think it would be BYD or XPeng. I think it would be Wuling or Chery with their very affordable micro EVs. At this stage, I think it might be terribly difficult for any of the brands like BYD, XPeng or NIO. I don't see any market for them, possibly not even the domestic market, as if they priced their vehicles profitably, their sales would drop so much they would still make a net loss. There are no new advancements in batteries coming that will cut costs in half. It's about as good as it gets now. And given autos have been manufactured for over a century, there aren't many new advancements there either, unless you copy Tesla, which is just too difficult, and will bankrupt them faster. China does have some advantages though. For example, they control the majority of the processing and refining of the minerals for EVs. On top of that, they have the CCP. A lot of people say the CCP won't let these EV companies fail. I tend to think that is likely to an extent. They may let some fail and consolidate some others, but I think they want to attempt to continue to be an EV manufacturer. Would the CCP just buy into these companies to give them more capital? Would they nationalise them completely or offer more subsidies? Well, the subsidies have actually been dwindling, and are likely to stop. In all honesty, I'm not sure what Chinese EVs can survive. BYD obviously can keep going, and the micro EVs, but perhaps the CCP might decide that's enough if the other EVs are still losing too much money. Auto companies do not have low overheads. Alright, so let's just play that back. The Chinese aren't making enough sales. Even if they did make enough sales, they can't manufacture EVs fast enough to even consume said sales. And even if they could manufacture them fast enough, then they couldn't make a profit with them anyway. And even if they did raise their prices to include a profit, then there wouldn't be enough customers to buy them. There is nothing major coming their way to decrease costs. Their only hope is that consumers will realize that EVs are more valuable and they can raise their prices. However, even if that was the case, then they still wouldn't have enough cells to make the cars in any decent quantities. Meanwhile, Legacy are jumping ship and going all in on EVs. They're borrowing every cent they can, as they know ICE is finished and their legacy businesses will all implode, likely taking down the entire company and bankrupting it. But perhaps they'll get bailouts, and out of the ashes will come the EV business, likely without a car dealer network, maybe even no unions, and actually potentially profitable, with enough cells available to meet demand, due to all the ICE vehicles diminishing. Personally, I don't want to be left with just Tesla and Chinese EVs. I would like much more variety. It's sad that Lucid and Rivian won't make it, but Legacy still has a chance. I want more variety in the industry. I want contributions from more nations and cultures. They all contribute in their own way. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.